Hello everyone, and welcome to the IATEFL Belfast Closing Plenary Panel Discussion, Environmental Sustainability in ELT, Which Way Now? Before I introduce the panellists to you, just to let you know how the session will run, they'll have a discussion for around 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll open up the floor for some questions. And then we'll repeat that 3 times throughout the session. So, without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce you to Ceri Jones from Spain.
Hello, hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for inviting me to take part, and thank you particularly for letting me beam in from Spain. It's a really hot, sultry day here today. We're at the beginning of a heat wave, unprecedented. I know that adjective is used so much, but it's going to be 40 degrees plus in internal Spain, inland Spain, this weekend. And although these temperatures are normal in summer, they are by no means normal in May. So it's kind of a very fitting reminder for me of the growing crisis of the climate. Climate emergency is actually here and with me today. But apart from that, I'm also representing ELT Footprint, as you can see behind me, and I'm really proud to be one of the founding members, and I'll be talking more about this during the session. Could I ask if anybody there in the audience who's a member of the ELT Footprint community, maybe you'd like to put your hand up? I think I can see some raised hands. It's quite difficult
we've got quite
to see on the camera.
Up.
Yeah, lovely, lovely. And I know that there will be people following the live stream on Facebook as well. So if there are any ELT Footprint members on Facebook, could you just add a hello in the comments or something? That would be wonderful. And I think maybe I should just very quickly explain what ELT Footprint is. It's an amazing community of educators, all sharing the same goal to raise awareness and take action to address environmental issues in whatever way we can in the profession of ELT. And to be a member simply means to follow us somewhere on social media. So we mainly live on Facebook, where we have a Facebook group, and I'd like to invite anybody who's interested, please come and join us. You need to find the page on Facebook and then ask to join, and we'll be there to invite you in, to welcome you. Okay, thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Ceri. And then we have Geoffrey Maroko from Kenya.
Hi, everyone. My name is Geoffrey Maroko, as Sarah has rightly put it. I am a university lecturer. I teach at Machakos University. That is the area of specialization is applied linguistics. Currently, I'm interested in traditional environmental knowledge, English language teaching, and also working with local communities. And I hope I'll be talking about those elements in the next few minutes. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Geoffrey. And finally, Owain Llewellyn from Wales.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I'm Owain, and I'm currently between jobs, but the one permanent thing in my life since 2012 is my website called ELT Sustainable, which is composed of language lessons focusing on environmental issues.
Great, thanks, Owain. So, Geoffrey, first to you, if I may. As you said, your work currently focuses on Indigenous knowledge and environment conservation and protection. Could you tell us a bit more about this, please?
Thank you, Sarah. This idea of years where we were conducting a scoping study involving, people living with HIV/AIDS. Apparently, these people have formed self-help groups in the local villages among the Kisii community or the Abaguzi community who live in the western part of Kenya. Now, these people are in community-based organizations and self-help organizations. Now, in our conversations with them, it emerged that sometimes they prefer taking herbal medicine to fight opportunistic infections. And also they find a lot of nutritional value in traditional foods. But now they argued that the sources of traditional food are diminishing, and also the sources of these herbal medicines are also diminishing because of climate change, because of urbanization of villages, because of devolution, which was implemented in the country in the year 2013. So because of that, they really fear that in future, if we don't do really something about the environment, we are likely to lose sources of medicine from our natural habitats. Now, this is coupled with, the competency-based curriculum, which is currently being implemented in the country. Now, in this curriculum, traditional environmental knowledge has been integrated. And now I thought that some of these ideas I have received from the local communities, probably we need to do something. We need to harvest some information that probably in future could be used to develop materials for English language learning. Then the UN has actually declared the year 2022 to the year 2032 as the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. So when you look at all these opportunities, we see that there is really a lot of need really to work around this area so that we come up with information that we can use to sustain, preserve, and protect our environment. So in a nutshell, that is what we are working on at the moment. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Geoffrey. So, Owain, this commitment to focusing on contextualization and what can be done locally is something that you're very keen on as well.
Definitely, and I really admire Geoffrey's approach about this, because the difficulty I've had over the years is that I've been creating materials for use globally. So whether it's on my website or work I've done with the British Council, it's sustainable lessons to be used globally. But one of the challenges there is how to make this relevant across in different contexts. And actually, it's just not always possible. So you have to either make lessons locally, or if you're making them globally, to make them adaptable for different local contexts.
And Ceri, this is something that you recognise?
Sorry, yes, definitely. I would say that recently we conducted a survey amongst the ELT footprint community, which we then used the results for an article which is currently under review to be published in the LT Journal. By we, I say Sarah Mercer, Nair Ibrahim, Kath Billsborough, and myself. And one of the things that we found was that most action is being taken in educational circles at grassroots, that there is so much going on, but in pockets around the place. And reviewing the literature, current recent literature, maybe in the last 5 years or so, on environmental literacy in particular, we see this place-based eco-pedagogy that's coming through again and again. And basically, it's projects so similar to the one that you're describing, Geoffrey, in lots of different places, in Indonesia, in the States, in Australia. There's that the the students are looking really, really closely at their own local ecosystems, learning about connections, learning to think about how systems work and the consequences of actions within their own local patch. And then this gives them the chance to grow that eco-literacy of system thinking. And I think that this is something that we also see reflected in the LT footprint conversations, for example, of teachers who are talking about their day-to-day practices in the classroom and sharing their ideas or asking for ideas. And again, the thing that's important to people is to root it in their context so that it's relevant and relatable, and that the starting point for learners is the world that they know. And so that another kind of cornerstone of eco-literacy is empathy for the everything in the world, the human and the non-human together, and that starting from your context, learning a story like Geoffrey's story is something that really has been shown to be transformative. So even something which might be simply telling that story is going to have repercussions, and small things like that can make big differences. And this is something that we're seeing across the community, but also across the literature.
Can I come in here? Yes. I just want to talk about a very practical example of this. I used to teach in Bulgaria and Algeria, and like many places in the world, rural to urban migration is a big thing. It's what many people want to do, and this has many social implications and environmental implications. And I wanted to do a lesson about this. And if you're in Bulgaria or Algeria in a rural area, the chances are you might find a house that's been left behind because people have moved to the cities. And you're also very likely to find a big old walnut tree that possibly outlives the house. And I came across this poem, an elegy to a walnut tree, which so beautifully describes the importance of this walnut tree to people and how they've all gone to the cities. And so I decided to make a lesson about it. And this lesson worked really well in Algeria and in Bulgaria because their walnut trees are common. But if this lesson was to be used, and it's relevant urban to rural to urban migration everywhere, it would have to be a different form. It couldn't be about a walnut tree. For example, Geoffrey, if I was doing a lesson in Kenya about rural to urban migration, is there a plant or a tree that might symbolize this that I could use instead?
Thank you very much. Actually, what you are saying is pretty much, resonating to what I see in the village where I come from. The whole aspect of context. Like the walnut tree that you're talking about could mean different things to different communities. Even here in Kenya, we have like the mugumo tree. Among the Kikuyu community, it's a tree about life. It's a tree about leadership. It's a tree that has a lot of religious significance. But when you go to other communities, it may not really mean the same. So, which is why if somebody wrote a poem about that tree, probably it could mean a lot to Kikuyu students, or those students who come from the community where the tree is known to refer to all those things I've mentioned. But if you took the same poem to a community which does not associate all those to that tree, then the poem may not be responsive. The learners may not respond well to the poem. So that's why we need to really do some research into communities so that we see what they value, what they think about their natural habitats, what the various plants mean to them. And then we develop materials that make sense to those particular learners. Yeah, because really the same material may not mean the same thing across the board. Now, in the rural community where I come from, like now these plants I'm interested in, we have traditional ways of preserving them. For example, we use the names of plants to name places. And you'll find that ecologically, these places or locations were really the home of that particular plant. So if we talk of the walnut, for example, in my local language, you'll find that a place where walnuts really grew has been given that name, But now why we think that we are losing diversity, we are losing biodiversity, is that the names are not really clearly associated with, we don't see the kind of vegetation that was known to really belong to the places according to how they are named, okay? Which is why some conscious efforts need to be made to really replant those trees so that the place names can really mean something. Yeah, so really I wanted to agree with you in so many words that context is very critical in designing lessons, in designing materials, in designing poems, in designing narratives that we can use in the classroom. Otherwise, if we use one across the board, some students may get lost along the way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Geoffrey.
Thank you.
That's a great place to pause.
I think there's a...
Oh, no, it's not. Ceri, please go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add that I think that's a wonderful example there of the disconnect, which is also very often a problem, that as you say, of the streets no longer reflect the trees that once grew there. And I think it's a great metaphor for one of the problems that we're facing when we're talking about addressing sustainability and especially environmental issues in the classroom, that we need to narrow that sense of disconnect. Sorry, that was it.
It's fine, thank you. So have we got any questions from the floor at this point for our panellists, please? If you'd like to ask a question, if you could raise your hand, and we've got some roving mics.
Thank you so much for raising a very serious issue of globalization. And this is related to the discussion that we had, but it's a little bit diverted to digital tools. But I was talking about, we all know globalization. We know globalization, we know localization, but I think we really need localization, because you already said the content to be adapted to the local context. I don't agree. I think in this case we need to adopt the local context and then sit with you and ask you, how are you going to adapt this? But you have to adopt our context, our local context. I'm talking about in the light of translanguaging. So local context with the end users at the end of the tunnel, with their needs, with their languages, different languages, to make this work. And then we will see what we need to apply on this content to fit into whatever purpose that we need it to fit, or whatever objectives. So it's, I even just coined a neologism, which is localization, where the local context comes on the top. And then we think of how to take it to fit into the global world, but not vice versa. Thank you very much.
So yeah, thanks for the question. If I understand correctly, you mean that the starting point should be the global towards the local. In fact, I completely agree in that much of my time has been spent creating lesson plans that are probably, I hope, being used globally. But increasingly, as I've gone on with this, I found the challenges how it can then be used locally. And on a very practical level, that for me means designing a lesson that can be modified greatly. So if I make that lesson about the walnut tree that's relevant where I'm teaching, it then has to be not used as is in Kenya, but would need the poem and the tree to be changed to deal with a similar issue, but in a different area. Does that address your question?
Okay. Can I come in with something as well? I love the new term you coined, although I'm not sure that I've quite got my tongue around it. I know that we've been used to using glocalization when we're talking, for example, about teaching culture with a small c, and how we look first maybe at something that's a universal given. So let's take a really simple example like food. That's something that people globally are interested in, but then we look at it from a local aspect and we study a local phenomenon, and then we take a step back and see the connections with the bigger picture. And I think that, I don't know if this is answering your question at all, but I think we all here feel that the local context is a great starting point. But I think we also would agree that we don't want to stop there, that we want also to have an awareness of a bigger picture, and so that how the local is part of a larger phenomenon as well. I don't know if that's answering your question at all.
Probably I can put in something to the question. Well, I want to agree with the questioner that really we cannot really talk about localization per se, but like now in what we are doing, we are thinking about coming up with data sets on a local community, for example, that I'm working in, and I hope that similar work can be replicated in other communities. So it's a matter of saying, in my community, we have these plants, and these are the uses we associate, we make of these plants. So we'll be very happy to hear what other communities, use those similar plants to do. Now, with these databases, it's very possible now to do things like translation, where we can translate the information from one language to another language. And this form of information sharing, now transcends that local sphere, and now it goes, to even broader context. So it's very practicable. First, to begin from the local, then you can share out what you've come up with to a wider context, particularly where translation becomes possible. Thank you.
That's exactly what I coined. It's used, the starting point is the local, and then you took it to the world, right? So localization, right? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Could we take another question from the floor?
I wonder if, as time goes on, the nature of these lessons needs to be changing. And I wonder what your view is on the fact that it seems to me that the lessons don't seem to have developed any sense of urgency about them. And it seems to me that as every year goes past, the situation becomes more urgent?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. On the one hand, I'm very happy to see that there's a much greater interest in environmental issues. We see it with the increased focus of that on course books, but at the same time, I do worry that the focus tends to be, especially on the individual. So, are you recycling? Are you buying second-hand? I think we need to be looking much more at the root causes of this, which are quite a lot more serious than recycling your own waste, but rather to collective action to deal with the big polluters. And I think that's definitely the case. And I don't want to preempt what I'm supposed to be saying at the end, but I think to start moving towards a much more pressing collective action rather than the focus on individual action would be a good start.
Ceri.
Yeah, I totally agree with Owain and the questioner. My question to throw back would be, what are the lessons? Because there are so many different approaches, and it depends on the age group that you're teaching. And with younger learners, maybe we do want to foster hope. We want to foster empathy. We don't want to create eco-anxiety with younger learners. But I think that as a profession and as professionals, we can work together as collectives to become lobbies, to raise awareness, to learn more ourselves, to be more knowledgeable about the growing problem, and to work within our sphere of influence in whatever way we possibly can. So that may be through lessons, but I think it's much more through influencing the people who are around us and taking action and being seen to take action, and to walk the walk and not only talk the talk in our lessons. I don't know if that helps with answering the question at all. I think I've been a little vague, but I really totally agree that we need to do more than talk about recycling plastic in class.
Thanks, Ceri. Perhaps this is a good point, Geoffrey, to bring you in and to ask you about the work that you're doing, the data that you're collecting. What impact is that going to have on your teaching? How are you going to use the results of the work that you've been involved with?
Well, Sarah, I think if we look around, we see that most of the health concerns we are seeing globally have their roots, in climate change. And which is why we need to integrate environmental sustainability in our course offerings in the primary schools, secondary schools, and even in the universities. So, like the projects we are doing, we want to look at those plants that have a lot of significance among the Abagusi people of southwestern Kenya. Now we want to collect lexical information about these plants, and this information includes things like, the name of the plant, the phonetic transcription, morphological characteristics. For example, in singular, how does it look like? In plural, how does it look like? Botanical name, then figurative usage of the name, because ideally, like now where I come from, some of the proverbs are actually made from the environment, from animals, from plants, particularly those plants that have significance. So once we have this information, we also need to describe those plants that we are interested in. So in description, we have to describe what we see of the plant, then we have to touch it, and we describe what it feels like to touch it. And for those that are not poisonous, we have to test it, and you describe their taste and all that. And all that information is going to keyed in to build those databases. Now, what we think is that once these databases have been constructed, it will be possible now to come up with machine learning applications like, translation, bi-directional translation, where it's possible now to translate from mother tongue to English and maybe other languages when we have such a database. Then we have speech to text applications. Then it will be possible now to come up with bilingual dictionaries. That will make it possible now for even languages to borrow what they miss from other languages. Like now English can borrow from Ekegusi, or even Ekegusi may borrow from English, where we don't have cognates that are similar, across languages involved in the translation. So with all this information, we are in the databases. Now material developers can easily write passages using this information. They can construct sentences that they can be used to teach grammar. They can use this information to teach pronunciation, particularly of mother tongue. Now that we are talking about the teaching of indigenous knowledge in Kenya, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot really that needs to be done. And in my view, it will make even learning of languages more interesting, because we are bringing what the learners see every day outside there to the classroom. So we are talking about the plant that they probably see out there and they have never known how significant it is. Now they are seeing the same plant in a poem, in a passage, in a short story, and so on. So in a way, we'll be teaching learners to become socially aware and ecologically intelligent and responsible, for the environment in many ways. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. So something that's come up again and again and came out of one of the questions that we had was this idea of collective responsibility, that we've all got a part to play. Ceri, you are a strong believer in focusing in what people can do within their own spheres of influence. Would you like to come in here?
Yes. A few years ago, I was really quite heavily influenced by an environmentalist in Australia, Will Grant. And you can see by him on the Pachamama website about the 4 levels of influence in activism, and that all 4 levels are important, but that there's a 3rd level, which is the one at which we can probably be most effective. So the first level is individual. So this would be individually not eating meat, for example, not buying things in plastic, for example. The next level is family and friends. So on that level, you might be an example for other people, you might influence other people within your circle of family and friends, and in that way, they might start considering issues. Then on the 3rd level is how we act as professionals. So within our professional sphere and the influences that we have, which are going to be, especially as educators, if we start to look at the network of influence we have, it's massive. If we look at, as a teacher, you have your students, but also you have the staff, the institution you're working within. That each of your students also opens out exponentially to have all of their influences as well. So we're in an incredibly strong position to be able to use our influence to lobby for change, for example, to lobby for action, or to be examples of action. And that if we look, so the fourth level is the macro level that I don't think we need to ignore at all either, but the macro level is when we are voting, when we're going out on the street, when we're protesting, when we're trying to exert pressure on governments and large businesses and the big players who really are the ones who need to be taking action. But our strongest point of influence is within our professional sphere. And I think that we've seen this, again, sorry, going back to ELT footprint, but the fact of having a strong community which has been seen means that people from the community have been invited more and more. We've seen this over the last 3 years since the community was founded to speak at conferences, whether in person or online, to write articles, to conduct surveys, and basically to spread the word and motivate and support people who before maybe felt that they were just individuals who were isolated. But coming together and being part of a network, for me, has been massively motivating. It means that I personally, in whatever I do as a professional, I always have this responsibility in the back of my mind, that I am part of a collective that is trying its best to raise awareness, to take action where action is possible within our sphere of influence. And I don't know if I can just take one example that recently I was working with a group of trainers. We were working on a really interesting project in Nigeria that Nikki Hockley talked about earlier in the conference in this room that we're in at the moment. And we were working with writing training materials and teaching materials using the Nigerian curriculum. And sustainability is one of the transversal objectives. So when we were working with the materials, I knew that I had other members of ELT Footprint in my team, and it really helped to keep me on track to make sure that I was meeting that objective across all of the materials as much as I possibly could. So for me, that's how we work as a collective. By using our influence, motivating and supporting each other, and just being stronger by seeing other people doing and showing other people what can be done.
Yep, fully agree there. And earlier on in this conference, I was lucky enough to go to Chaz Pugliesi's talk on ushering in the 21st century, the emotionally intelligent teacher. And it was really interesting because the writer of Emotional Intelligence, one of the key books in this field, his name is Dan Goleman. And along with a couple of other writers, he wrote a book called Eco-Literacy, and it has 5 practices of emotionally and socially engaged eco-literacy. And among them, we've already touched upon this developing empathy, not just for people, but for the more than human world as an important step to this. And the other thing, one of the other things he talks about is making sustainability a social practice. And there's various examples of communities that have lived in a very sustainable way, and that has obviously been much more effective than an individual working on their own. And coming back to what Ceri was saying, when I first started my website in 2012, it was a very lonely existence. I did meet other people doing similar things later on, but then since then it seems to have rather mushroomed, and there's a lot more people doing this, which is heartening.
Thanks, Owain. Geoffrey, I know you've got some views on teaching in a context, in a way, as to build citizens that are socially aware.
Yeah, I want to pick it from where Owain stopped. He mentioned at some point that environmental sustainability should be a social practice. So if it should really be a social practice, then it's supposed to be our business, all of us as a community. And this has to start from the government to come up with the right policies that can be cascaded to, development of the right curriculum, which integrates this environmental sustainability in all the disciplines that we teach in our schools and even in the universities. And if the government is not working hard to come up with this enabling environment, then we have environmental lobby groups, they need to come in and they push the government to take up some of these issues, like now the Ministry of Education, the institutes of curriculum development. Then we have the publishers. In the past, publishers have been writing books without even consulting local communities to know what really resonates with them. Now, so the publishers need to engage, other actors in all this, so that they also come up with materials that are responsive to the needs of communities and also the needs of the learners, and of course, what government policies want. So researchers, teachers should also take up the role of researchers. For us to be innovative in our teaching, we need to really find time to research our environment, and let us, come up with examples that we can use in class from the environment, So when we look at all these actors, and if each one of them does what they can, of course, we are going to produce learners who are socially aware about the environment and who will make a difference. And probably we, in the long run, will be able to see health outcomes that are good, and also probably a stop to any future pandemic. Thank you. I hope it makes sense.
Thank you. Before I take a few more questions from the floor, this collective responsibility carries quite a lot of weight with it, and there are teachers who might feel overwhelmed, that they don't have the expertise to broach, to address these issues within their classes. What would you say to them? Ceri? You're on mute, Ceri.
Sorry. Yeah, I was thinking about that. It worries me a lot when we add more work on a teacher's shoulders, because there are so many teachers are already so hardworking. They have so little time. I think they really need support from the structures and the systems around them as well, and that it shouldn't fall to one individual to be the researcher and the materials writer and everything. I think they deserve support from their institutions, from training programs, even from collectives who will do that research for them and then share it with them. And I think that in this survey that I spoke about previously, we surveyed teachers who are already interested in addressing environmental issues and are addressing environmental issues in their classrooms. But one of the things that we asked was what obstacles there were to them being able to do this effectively. And one of the things was this feeling of being overwhelmed by the size of the topic, by how enormous it is, and by not feeling that they were experts in the topic and feeling a little bit lost as to what it was they were supposed to be addressing. So I think that one of the things that we need to work on, and I think work is already going on, but we need to accelerate it, is to create systems and frameworks that support these teachers. So go to, that they can turn to, which will answer their questions and give them confidence in teaching both the transversal environmental objectives that across all curricula, but also specifically the linguistic competencies, the communicative competencies that we as language teachers are focusing on. So it's how do we bring these two together? How do we integrate them? For example, I mean, I know there's work going on in a lot of different places, but recently, both myself and Owain have been involved in reviewing a very new sustainability framework, which is being developed by Cambridge University Press, which is taking steps in this direction of giving teachers, institutions, organizations, materials writers, publishers, across all of the various different educators, something that they can look to, which will give them a starting point. But I feel quite strongly, and this is something that myself and Catherine Billsborough have been working on recently as well, is to actually create practical examples of can-do statements that work for teachers as lesson outcomes that they can take into their classroom and use, with examples that they can adapt to their own needs. One example that we'd like to share as a can-do statement, so if I'd like to just quickly share with you, is to understand, explain, and give examples of greenwashing. So you can see here that there's the linguistic competences to understand, to explain, to give examples. It's very clear how we as language teachers can support those communicative competences. And then on the other side, there's this environmental turn on the lesson, as it were, of exploring what is greenwashing, but not just what is it. Can you find an example? Can you tell me why that example is greenwashing? And then to set the students out to look for culprits of greenwashing within their own context. This develops into a very practical lesson. It's action-based, it's project-based, it's local context-based, but it's also global. But it's something, I think, that kind of a detailed can-do statement can be incredibly useful as a starting point for teachers, and a lot of the work is already done for them. It's something they're familiar with. Can-do statements are something that language teachers are incredibly familiar with, and I think some kind of structure, some kind of framework that built on this would be incredibly useful.
Can I add something, Sarah, on that?
Please do, Geoffrey, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think Ceri has shared very pertinent information, and I think there should be some kind of coordination in all this, so that the training of teachers also we have to do something about it as well, because most of these teachers probably are not prepared to teach language in very practical and environmental friendly way. So if we can redesign our curricula in institutions of higher learning where we train these teachers, I think it can help a lot. And it also touches on the curriculum, both at the secondary school level and the primary school level. And I think the same is supposed to be reflected at higher levels, so that we see a kind of causal connection, so that the universities are not doing things which do not, resonate with what is happening in the secondary schools and also the primary schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions from the floor at this stage?
Whilst we're waiting, I'd like to maybe nudge Owain, who has done some great work with training courses for teachers, and the teachers who have taken those courses have really benefited from them. And also, some great work is coming out from the British Council at the moment.
Sorry, Ceri,
training.
Sorry, we've got a question from the back, if we could.
Excellent, wonderful.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Ceri. This is Colin from the British Council. So, I wanted to just give some general reflections. I've been very inspired by Owain and Ceri's work, and both ELT Footprint and Owain have been supporting us in developing resources and a MOOC that we will be running later this year. And I'm sitting next to Relo from America, and they have an open tender at the moment if you want to write a new course, which is coming later on. One of the things that I wanted to say is I think it's important that we keep an eye on education in general, which is something I've been trying to do. We're in our ELT niche here at this conference, but this is all part of a broader movement towards what was called for a long time climate change education, and in the UN Sustainable Development Goal and in the Paris Agreement, countries signed up to and said, yes, we want more climate change education, not just in science, but across the curriculum, including language education. But not enough has actually happened. It's beginning to happen through publishers, through training, through resources. I'm seeing fantastic innovations in what was called climate change education. I keep saying what was called climate change education because the UN have recently stopped calling it climate change education and are now calling it Action for Climate Empowerment, or ACE. And I think that's a good term that we could also adopt. And maybe we'll stop talking about climate change, but start more talking about the climate crisis. I'm really happy that this is the closing plenary and that there have been some amazing talks. James, earlier in the week, I'm sure he'll send you his slides, and earlier today from National Geographic, there's been fantastic innovations. And I just wanted to finish by talking about the opportunity is to, I think, in the future of English, that we talk about how many people around the world are learning English, and the predictions are maybe between 1.5 or 2 billion learners, and we all need to do whatever we can to help those learners analyze, understand, and act on environmental issues. So thank you for all the work that you've done and that you've led. Thanks.
Thank you, Colm. Was there anybody else with a hand up?
Hello, this is Juan from Lima, Peru. What would you say to, or what words of encouragement would you give to those teachers who would like to start incorporating environmental aspects or issues in their classes, but who face certain difficulties, like, for example, trying to finish the book or finish the curriculum, or even some resistance from different, let's say, factors around them? What would you say to those teachers who would like to start that change in their own classes?
Yeah, it's a really important thing you've raised there, because over the years I've faced this problem doing environmentally focused language lessons. And to give an example, one of them was that other teachers felt that what I was doing was a form of indoctrination. Another problem that what I thought back then was a problem was that I'm an English literature graduate. I'm not a scientist. And I think what I would say to teachers in this position is that as language teachers, we've got some amazing skills which are particularly the ability to facilitate communicative activities. And that's what we do. And we give feedback on performance. And therefore, I think we're in possibly a stronger position to do these lessons. No, definitely a stronger position to do such lessons than a climate scientist, than Greta Thunberg, or an activist. So I think teachers, my advice would be to start with focusing on your strengths, which is to facilitate a discussion where learners are going to come to their own conclusions, to facilitate that classroom community, and allow them to draw their own conclusions about these environmental matters, and to continue giving them feedback on their language performance. Would that help, do you think?
Thank you.
Can I add that I think also start from something that you know, something that you feel quite strongly about, because I think in everything, when we teach from the heart, then it's so much more motivating for our students. Obviously, we then find the connection that we think is going to engage our students in whatever it is we're interested in. And that's always such a great starting point, is to start with something that you think is important. And then we know as teachers how best to engage our students and take the first step. I think that's the thing, is not to worry about it, but take that first step.
Yeah, maybe Sarah, I can also add something to that. Now, teachers have to become innovative in their teaching. They have to really look for practical activities. For example, if we are using a text, a reading passage on how to prepare a seedbed, for example, after reading and answering the comprehension questions, let there be a follow-up activity where the learners can participate in preparing a seedbed, maybe at the school farm, okay? So that they have an opportunity to put into practice what they have learned or what they have seen in their textbook. So if we can integrate theory and practice, I think it will be, a very rewarding method of teaching language. Thank you.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Okay, in bringing our, we've talked about lots of things today, and you've no doubt given us lots of quite significant issues and questions to take away with us. In closing the session, I'd like to ask you all, what lessons have we learned from the past 2 years, and what are we going to take away with us moving forwards?
My where next list would be as follows. Obviously, we have to start with our learners. And I see where the learners would benefit would be that they have a sense of empowerment to deal with this pressing crisis that's already upon us. And that means to get there, they need to have these issues no longer brushed under the carpet, which then I think leads to the teacher and our role in supporting them getting to this place. I think that increasingly teachers, as well as being language teachers, we need to be empowering our language learners to take part in the dialogue around sustainability and to feel that they can act, and English skills are obviously going to be a key part of this, as well as a knowledge of these issues. Now, obviously, teachers can't do this on their own, and so I was thinking of who is supporting them, and I thought of school managers, trainers. I think that in schools, in training, we need to start at least having this dialogue increasingly of what a teacher's role is, and in particular a language teacher's role is, in bringing sustainability into the classroom, which I'm well aware is going to be at times a difficult and a disagreeable, possibly uncomfortable discussion. But I think it's time that we have it. And last of all, I would say publishers, materials developers, great this move towards bringing environmental issues in. I think we need to move increasingly away from individual actions we can take to what are the root causes. And again, this could be an uncomfortable discussion for global publishers, organizations, because we are going to come to some uncomfortable truths about what the causes of these are. And finally, I think there's a research agenda here looking at the intersection between eco-literacy and language teaching, which I think is a fascinating area, and I would love to see more in that area. So that would be my list.
Thank you, Owain. How about you, Geoffrey?
Thank you. Mine is really to say that our health will depend on how healthy the environment is, and therefore it's supposed to be our business to do our bit as language teachers and integrate these activities. You may find that the curriculum does not allow now, or the materials that we have, the approved textbooks, do not allow that for now, but we need to be innovative. We need to create additional materials as language teachers that can revitalize the teaching of English, and also foster environmental sustainability. For example, you know, I started off by saying that there is a lot of wealth of information in traditional environmental knowledge. And because of that, you find that in traditional settings, some of the health concerns we are facing today never existed during the olden days, because the environment was good. It had not been polluted. The air was good. The water was clean, and all that. Particularly, there is a proverb in my community. I don't know whether you get it. Moneke tori iwa. So moneke is a type of plant which is quite succulent. The plant is highly medicinal. I think scientifically the plant is Kalanchoe decimiflora rolfe. That is the scientific name. So it's a succulent plant known for its medicinal value among my community. So when we say moneke, tori, iwa, it means this plant does not have thorns. So literally, this means that we don't need to harm it. Wherever it grows, don't harm it. If you are cultivating and you find it in your field, don't uproot it, because it doesn't have, it's harmless. It cannot harm you. It doesn't have a thorn that can prick you. And symbolically, it means it refers to the female gender, that these are people who are less harmful, and therefore we don't need to be to be cruel to them, like now our wives, our daughters, and so on. They are likened to this type of plant. So literally, in its preservation, you know, we need to protect it. But again, it has some lessons it can teach us on how we can relate to one another in our families. So I think as teachers, let us be innovative and let us make our teaching of English interesting in the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Geoffrey. And finally, Ceri.
Okay, lovely. I think everything that was on my list has already been covered by both Owain and Geoffrey, but I think there are maybe 3 things that I'd like to say still. One is that let's not forget that the situation is really urgent. It's easy to put our heads in the sand, to bury our heads in the sand, to say, because it's scary. You know, sort of taking action is scary. So let's try and walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And let's build hope through action, because hope is something that we can grow, and we can do it by taking action, and we can do it by taking action together and not letting this just lie, making sure that eco-literacy is given the same level of importance as other skills like critical thinking and digital literacy, that it just becomes a given, that it's part of everything that we do in education. And also that we take it on board, that we've learnt new ways of doing things that we were forced to do during the pandemic. And some of those things are actually helping the issues of sustainability. So maybe we should continue to walk some of those paths that we were forced to walk under the pandemic. Maybe we should be exploring more about how we can connect, as we've been connecting today, Geoffrey and myself from different continents, connecting with Belfast, and that there are 100 different ways that we can do things in a new way. And if each one is stepping forward towards more sustainability, then that's what we should be looking for. Each one of us, what's the next step that we take?
Thank you, Ceri. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our session today. I'm sure you agree we've all got a lot to take away, to think about, and I'm sure any one of our panellists would be delighted to continue a dialogue with anybody here today that wants to do that. So a big thank you, please, to Ceri, Geoffrey and Owain.